Hey, it's time for another edition of What You Reading, where people always ask me, what are you reading? Comics, novels, magazines, backs of cereal boxes, whatever. Chuck, what are you reading when you're not writing? And this is where I answer that question. And some of you seem to like it. Let's get right to it. Um, this book, Butcher's Crossing by John Williams. No, not that John Williams, a different John Williams. Um, This is a book I never heard of until recently, and I don't know how I never heard of it. I was first alerted to it because it's adapted into a Western starring Nicolas Cage, which was released last year in Europe and Asia, but it has not yet been released in the United States, either to theaters or on any kind of physical media or streaming. I saw a teaser trailer for it recently, so I'm assuming that we will be seeing the film version of Butcher's Crossing soon. And what it is, it's about buffalo hunters. And I really, really enjoyed the novel a whole bunch. Um, it it's not your typical Western novel in that it's not about square-jawed, stalwart heroes saving the rancher's daughter or anything like that. It's very much a historical Western, and it's written with this guy either had some experience hunting buffaloes or did a whole lot of research or talked to someone who hunted buffaloes. Novel was released in 1960. It's not beyond reason that somewhere in his life he ran across a former buffalo hunter. But in any case, I won't give too much of the plot away. But it's about a young guy who drops out of Harvard and he goes out west with more money than sense, and it's in the waning days of the buffalo hunting era, and he has enough money. He wants to finance a hunt. He wants to go on a buffalo hunt, and he finds an experienced hunter who swears that he knows where there is a valley in the Colorado Rockies, at the foot of the Colorado Rockies, that is teeming with buffalo, just like it was in the old days when the buffalo moved by the millions across the plains. And he says this valley is just full of buffalo. But he hadn't been there for 10 years, and he's sure no one's ever found it because he never heard of anybody finding this massive trove of buffalo, of the big bison, the big beeves. And so they head on out there, and everything horrible you can possibly imagine happens to them, including they get snowed in to the valley for an entire winter. And Williams's descriptions of everything is amazing. He takes you there. And his use of language, he stays in period. There's no anachronistic anything, personalities or dialogue or anything like that. And he really does take you there. And I read a lot of this novel poolside here in Florida, but I still felt chilly because his ability to describe what it's like to be very, very, very cold and wet and miserable for months. Just amazing. And the details about the hunt itself, the descriptions of hunting, shooting, skinning, hauling these things, buffalo hides, the market, just incredible. And I really, am curious to see what the movie looks like because, this scene from the movie looks very much like what I read in the novel. And, now it's not, it's not the happiest book you'll ever read. In fact, it's kind of bleak, and it's often compared to Cormac McCarthy's Blood Meridian, but it's nowhere near as much a downer as Blood Meridian. They keep talking about wanting to make a Blood Meridian movie, and as much as I like this novel, please don't make a movie of this. It would encourage suicide. It's just, this is not a fun novel to read. In fact, Cormac McCarthy, I think he was so impressed with how bleak this book is that for the rest of his writing career, tried to get even bleaker, but never managed it. Even The Road is not as much of a just black is black story as this one is. Blood Meridian is just a horror novel about the depths of human depravity, and I'm making you want to read it more and more, aren't I? You should read it if you've got the stomach for this stuff. But yeah, it's yeah. Well, let's talk about something pleasant. I'm reading this volume 5 of Little Orphan Annie, and it collects strips from 1934 through 1935. And I kind of have an inside baseball on this one. I'm a big Little Orphan Annie fan. Have been for a long time. And so is Dean Mullaney, my buddy Dean Mullaney. And Dean, one of his dreams was to reprint Little Orphan Annie in its entirety. And, I think it runs to 12, 13 volumes. And I remember early on when he was starting the Library of American Comics, which has reprinted it's the Cadillac of comic strip reprints. Dean and his team just do an incredible job. They literally leave you wanting nothing more than what they did. Just absolutely perfect collections, and they do a lot of restoration work on the strips and everything else to give you the best package you could possibly get. The best paper, best binding, lots and lots of background material and trivia and oddities and essays by comic historians. Just fantastic packages. I've got shelves of these damn things. But I remember Dean telling me that he was in a quandary, because if he was going to do Little Orphan Annie, did he want to start in 1934 when the strip really gets into its stride, or did he want to start the strip from its beginnings in the middle of the 1920s? And he finally decided he did the right thing. He started the strip from the beginning. So a lifelong dream of his was to print Little Orphan Annie from beginning to end and publish it. And a lifelong dream of mine was to read it, because I had some Little Orphan Annie old stuff, but nowhere near enough to feed my my Little Orphan Annie desires. And this volume really does bring the strip into its golden age. This is the beginning of, what really made this strip take off. And in the first story, Annie, she's an orphan. She's always wandering around, penniless, her and her dog. And they meet this old dude on the street playing the violin, blind guy, Uncle Dan. And he's not that great a violinist. And so Annie decides, she's going to help him out, and she sings. And so when she sings, she brings in more cash. So they've actually got money to get a room and eat and all this stuff. And then they run across this dude who wants to be their business manager. He thinks they're really talented. He sees them singing on the street, and he says, I can get you into theaters. Now, they should have known not to trust this guy, because his name was Charles C. Chisler. Harold Gray was a big Charles Dickens fan, it's quite obvious, and he would often name his characters directly reflecting their personalities and motives. But anyway, Charles C. Chisler cheats the hell out of them. And he makes Annie sing until she loses her voice and is ill. She's hospitalized because she's working these two so hard. And if you think Chisler gets away with it, you don't know Little Orphan Annie. Nobody gets away with anything when Little Orphan Annie's around. And Chisler not only gets caught in his scheme to rob them blind, but also in Harold Gray fashion, suffers. And that's the thing. At the end of a lot of these stories, you'll just see the bad guy led away by the police or whatever. That's not enough for Gray. He has to show the full scale of human degradation that his bad guys must suffer because they've crossed Little Orphan Annie. And when justice catches up with these guys, it can take weeks of comic strips to show you their suffering and humiliation and the pain and torment that they're going through because of their previous actions. And that's what's really cool about the strip. The other great thing about the strip is how it it delved into Gray's politics. Gray was a very much a conservative, very much in the 1930s an opponent to the New Deal, which really wasn't a popular stance to take. Certainly wasn't popular with Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who tried to get the Chicago Tribune to either pull the strip from the paper or limit its distribution. It's probably the first case of shadow banning we've ever seen. They tried to get Harold Gray canceled. And Gray was great at stories of corruption. The best story in this volume, and the big one that really lifts the strip above the stories up to this point have been excellent in Little Orphan Annie, but it really takes off here in 1934. And with Daddy Warbucks is framed for corruption and put in prison by a bunch of crooked politicians, and who are looking to enhance their careers by bringing down a big famous guy. Wow, that's kind of sounds familiar. And so the bulk of this volume is taken up with a long, epic story about Annie's two swindlers showing up to say that they're Annie's true parents, Daddy Warbucks being put into prison, this enormous corrupt political gang controlling this town, and what happens as a result of that. And then Annie thwarting a gang of deadly thieves. It's a gang of thieves robbing banks and jewelry stores and things like that. And her and Sandy bring them down. That's the amazing thing. These stories are like salted peanuts once you start reading them. And it as you can see, they're drawn in this very simplistic style. And Gray is a very direct storyteller. But the thing that he knew most was how to keep that pot boiling, how to keep your interest in the story. He always had 2 or 3 things going on at once. There was always the main plot and a subplot sort of bubbling underneath. And he really kept you involved. He really made you wonder what's going to happen next. And then you got, plucky Little Orphan Annie and Sandy. And I'm looking forward to the future volumes where we get to meet Punjab, and particularly the Asp. The Asp is one of my favorite fictional characters of all time. He's a sort of a hitman, killer, destructive force, sort of animal unleashed that Daddy Warbucks only calls on when things are really, really desperate. So that's something I have to look forward to in the reading of these volumes. Highly recommend them if you're into classic American comic strips. You need to check them out. And hey, you also need to check out my next Conan book, Caravan of the Damned. It should be dropping soon from our good friends at Archaven Comics. It's a second of my Conan novels. I've written 3. Third is written. Will be out, I guess, in a few months. But this is number 2. It's going to be available in paperback. It's going to be, I assume, available in ebook if you buy direct from Archaven. And we're going to have a special hardcover edition as well. And hopefully someday some audiobooks. Vox, if you're listening, can we do some audiobooks of these? That'd be super cool. Anyway, that's it for what you're reading for this week. I will keep reading. You keep watching. And I'll